heart sounds. So suppose this diagram is our heart. This diagram is our heart. We have inferior vena cava, we have superior vena cava, and then we have two atrias, one is left and this is right, and ventricles, and this is our aorta, and this is our pulmonary vein. So during the atrial systole, S4 sound comes, in which atria is contracting. Let me take another one. In which atria is contracting and blood is running down from atria to ventricle, and the sound which comes is S4. In another diagram, now after an atrial systole, we tend to close these things. They close and they close. So what happens is, when they close, mitral valve and tricuspid valve shut, close. The sound that comes is S1, which is the first heart sound that we hear. Also, valve on the left side closes before the right side. Fine. So we have S4 sound, we have S1 sound. Also, during isovolumetric contraction, at the beginning of it, like when everything is contracting, these guys shut, these M1 and M2 shut at the beginning of it. S1 sound, right? Now okay, I'll make a new diagram. And the beginning of it. Now what happens is, blood is going through. Now the blood goes through ventricles, right? Blood goes through ventricles, and these valves, they open. So when they open, there is an ejection click. And it opens, and it occurs after S1. After the snapshot, these things open because of the isovolumetric contraction. At the beginning of the isovolumetric contraction, S1 sound happens, and this injection click happens after S1 sound, right? And this means opening of aorta and pulmonary vein, right? Now what happens is this closure of aorta and pulmonary valve at the beginning of isovolumetric relaxation. When the heart stem starts to relax, these valves snap close, and this gives us the sound of S2, which is a fourth sound. And also aortic valve closes before. Here also left valve is closing before the right valve, and A2 is followed by P2, which means closure of the aorta is followed by closure of the pulmonary valve, and there's a gap of 3 milliseconds. There's a gap of 3 milliseconds between the two. Now on expiration, no such distinction can be made. When you are expiring, when person is expiring, no such distinction can be made. This 3 mm distinction cannot be made. But when a person is inspiring, this distinction can be made. Now A2 is shutting independent of inspiration, but P2 sound oscillates. So the P2 sounds, A2 closes, P2 is 3 milliseconds after A2 during inspiration, and during expiration it's much closer to the A2 sound. So in expiration there's no such distinction, but during inspiration A2 shuts, P2 sound can oscillate, and this is the splitting of S2. This is called splitting of S2. Now also there's a free fall of during when the heart is fully relaxed. There's a free flow of blood from atria to ventricle during because of these inferior vena cava and superior vena cava, and because of the relaxed position of the heart, the opening of mitral and tricuspid valve, there's an opening snap. So mitral and tricuspid open at the end of the isovolumetric relaxation. At the end of it, and the beginning of isovolumetric relaxation, S2 sounds come. At the end of it, and there's a opening snap, and at the beginning of isovolumetric contraction, S1 sound comes. Right? S2 sound comes at the beginning of the isovolumetric relaxation, and because of the rapid filling ventricle, rapid filling से S3 sound आता है, and free fall into ventricles is diastasis. Now there is opening of AV valve. AV valve opens at the end of IVR. At the end of IVR, they are opening. Closure and the beginning of IVC. Now what happens in ECG is there's a P wave, there's a QRS wave, and there's a T wave. So opening of the AV is happening here. AV valve opening happening here at the end of the T wave, and closure of the AV is happening later half of the R wave. This is the R wave. So here somewhere here the closure of this thing AV is happening, right? And there's another heart. There's another diagram. This is A, X, C, X, V and Y. V, X, C, X dash and A. Now end of X here, opening of this thing is happening, and end of VY descent here, and the opening is happening here, and end of X by this closure of AV, right? And opening of the semilunar at the end of IVC, and this contraction at the end of the contraction, semilunar valves open. Semilunar valves. Open at end of contraction. This is still confusing, but I'll tell you what will happen. So this is the beginning of IVR, this is the end of IVR, this is the beginning of contraction, sorry, this is contraction, this is relaxation, and end of it. Now at the beginning of IVR, there is a closure of semilunar valve. At the end of IVC, there is opening of semilunar valve. At the beginning of IVR, at the beginning of contraction, there is closure of AV valve. So in this heart, AV valve close in the beginning of contraction. When it's contracting, this shut, so the blood cannot go back. Now at the end of contraction, this is the opening of this, because since this is contracting, the blood has to go down from here, so this will open at the end of it, and blood cannot go back, blood has to go through the system now. And then now at the beginning of the isovolumetric relaxation, at the when there is relaxation, beginning of relaxation, closure of semilunar valve is happening. This will close, so the blood cannot go back into the heart. At the end of the relaxation, what happens is the opening of the AV valve. AV valve open at the end of the relaxation, so the blood that has gone through the system can come back into the heart and into the ventricles. So this is happening. Now this is opening and closure, and opening of the AV valve and closure of the AV valve, and the opening of the semilunar valve and closure of the semilunar valve. What happens when it happens in the ECG, that we'll discuss later. Now there's a difference between various heart sounds. So S1 is closure of the mitral and tricuspid. S2 is closure of the aortic and pulmonary vein, and S3 is rapid filling of the ventricles. S4 is the atrial systole, which is pre-systolic sound. Now, S1 and S2 they are high pitch, and S3 and S4 definitely are low pitch. That's why they're not heard. S1 can be of 25 to 50 hertz, and S2 can be 50 hertz, while the other ones they are less than 20 hertz. That's why they're not heard. They can be heard with the bell of the stethoscope, which is phonocardiogram. Now, and S1 and S2 can be heard via diaphragm of the stethoscope. Now, mitral and tricuspid area. The lub, this takes around 1.4 second, and this one takes around 0.11 second. So, between the S1 and S2 sound, S1 is closure of this because the heart is getting relaxed. Heart is getting compressed. So between the S1 and S2 there is systole. Between the S2, when the heart relaxes, the AV and the pulmonary valve close, so the blood cannot go back. And the S1, it's a diastole. So between S1 and S2, it's systole. S2 and S1, it's diastole. Now, if there is abnormality in the heart sound, so S3 is most the gushing of the because of the free fall of the ventricles, which is diastasis. S3 sound can be heard. That is most audible in athletes and in children. Fever in pregnancy is also included, but pathologically, if there is left ventricular failure, right ventricular failure, left ventricular failure, right ventricular failure, if there is heart disease, there is valvular disease, some kind of, if there is thyrotoxicosis, if there is anemia. So in S3, S3 pathologically can be heard in LVF, left ventricular failure, right ventricular failure, in thyrotoxicosis, in anemia, in valvular disease, in valvular disease, in heart disease, any kind of heart disease, idiopathic heart disease. Pathologic S4 sound pathologic can be heard in MI. Mind you, S4 is a sound when the blood is when there is atrial systole. Atrial systole के टाइम पे जो sound आता है, that is S4, and that is most audible in MI if there is angina, if HTN is present, if anemia is there, or any kind of heart block है, then and valvular disease है. S3 is a sound when there is diastasis, during the diastasis. So any kind of valvular disease is there, then S3 sound will be there. But S4 sound is when this is systole because of there's some contraction issue. Then it will be heard in MI, angina, HTN, anemia, heart block. S1 is a soft S1 in this is very soft S1 in obesity. If there is emphysema, and if there is mitral regurgitation. Very good. Okay, loud S1 will be in stenosis. Loud S1 will be in stenosis, both in mitral and stenosis, and in tricuspid stenosis, opening snap will be more. If there is opening snap, will be more in the mitral stenosis, and ejection click will be more in the aortic and pulmonary stenosis. Now A2 and P2, there is a difference of 30 milliseconds, I think. This is a difference of A2 and P2 के बीच में there is a difference of 30 milliseconds. So if there is a narrow split, that means P2 is closing before 30 and before it should. That means that either E2 has slowed down, this has slowed down, or this is closing faster. It will happen in case of stenosis. In the case of stenosis, that means there is narrow opening, slow, because of the stenosis. And if there is a wide split, that means P2 is closing way after them, then it could be ASD, atrial septal defect, or mitral regurgitation. Now reverse split. Splitting off. It's called splitting off. It's just normal off. This early P2 closure and late A2 closure, which is in complete left bundle branch block and Wolff-Kishner-Parkinson-White syndrome, I think that means. So reverse splitting occurs in left bundle branch block and WPW, right? अगर fixed white splitting है तो that means this is pulmonary stenosis and atrial septal defect. अगर variable है white split तो definitely MR. So what have we learned? We have learned that A2 closes 30 milliseconds before P2. They can be narrow split or can be wide split. Narrow split in case of stenosis, A2 will open longer. Alright, and stenosis. Then pulmonary stenosis, aortic stenosis के केस में होता है. And wide split will be in case of pulmonary stenosis. Pulmonary closure is delayed, and ASD, it could be because of the atrial septal defect or it could be because of mitral regurgitation. Now they can be fixed or they can be variable wide splitting. Variable wide splitting happens because of the mitral regurgitation, and fixed splitting happens because of the atrial septal defect and pulmonary stenosis. And reverse splitting occurs when P2 is early and A2 is because of the left bundle branch block, or because of the Wolff-Kishner-Parkinson-White syndrome. So now if there is only single S2, so it could be because of the emphysema, obesity, and complete left frontal branch block. And here we can hear the heart sound aortic area, second intercostal on the right side. The aortic second intercostal on the right side, and pulmonary second impulse on the left side. S2 and splitting P2 or Erb's point. That is, we can hear it on the third intercostal left of the sternum की left में हल्का सा. Tricuspid area is the fourth or fifth intercostal of sternum, below the sternum. Mid IC line, which is clavicle in fifth intercostal. That's mid clavicle line, intra intercostal. यहाँ tricuspid area, S2 splitting area, mitral area, tricuspid area. These are the heart sounds where you can hear the heart sounds. Now ECG. It was discovered by Ethuen Nobel. Ethuen law is 1, 2, 3, which says there should be 4 leads. This is 1 bipolar, 3 bipolar, 3 unipolar leads, and chest leads. 1 to 6 chest leads. So 1, 2, 3 limb leads, AVR, AVL, and AVF. They're the limb leads, and 1 to 6 are the chest leads. So there's a P wave, QRS, and T wave. So P wave is the atrial depolarization. The atrial starts to relax. Atrial depolarization, that means atrial starts to atrial systole contract upward and rounded, and SA node in both the atrias. QRS complex is ventricular depolarization. That means ventricle starts to contract, and Q waves in MI. Q waves in MI is characteristic of MI, evasion of interventricular septum. This evasion of interventricular septum and negative wave may or may not be seen. R wave is involvement of both the ventriculars in the depolarization. S wave is excitation of more basal part of the ventricles. So this is the P wave, QRS wave. So Q wave is a ventricular depolarization complex, QRS. Q wave is characteristic of MI. This is the problematic one. Now the R wave is it involves both arteries, involves both ventricles, and S wave is a representation of excitation of more basal part of ventricle, and P wave is atrial depolarization. T wave is ventricular repolarization. T wave is the ventricular. It's positive, it's rounded, and at the end of it there's a closure of semilunar valve. Now the U wave, which is rarely seen, represents slow repolarization of the papillary muscles. It represents slow repolarization of papillary muscles, and it's prominent in hypokalemia. Right, and J point. J is no electrical activity, point of no electrical activity, which is this one, I think. Right? Sorry, this is the J point. This point of no electrical activity, and tells about the dipping or elevation of the ST segment. And J at the end of the S, J is there, also known as Osborne's wave. J. Also known as Osborne wave. Osborne wave at 30 degrees Celsius, prominent J wave. At 30 degrees Celsius, prominent J wave can be seen. I don't know. segment interval. Now we are seeing the intervals in the segment. So I'll just take another color. Yellow is fine. Now there is wave and segments, right? So PR interval, which is this one, PR interval is a segment, this is the interval, right? Let me take another color which is more visible. Green is fine. Yes, this is the PR interval, this is the segment. Alright, so starting of P till the starting of Q is the PR interval, and it decreases. This decreases in WPW, White syndrome, Loewen-Gang-Levine syndrome, PR interval decreases in WPW and Loewen-Ganong-Levine syndrome. Increases, and it increases in heart block. Increase in heart block. Now this is a segment, this is no wave, and PR segment represents isoelectric. Always is isoelectric. ST segment is isoelectric. So if ST segment is elevated or depressed, ST segment is elevated with concavity. If it's elevated like this, there is acute pericarditis. With convexity, like convex here, to acute MI or Prinzmetal angina. Concavity, convexity, acute MI and Prinzmetal angina. Let's just see. ST segment. Okay, this is elevation of the ST segment. Here I can see this ST segment elevation, this is ST segment anti-inversion, with and without concavity, with upward concavity. So the okay. And this S elevation with concavity, non-concave. This concavity here, this is concavity, and this convexity. Typical of STEMI, if it's convex. If it's concave, it could be non-STEMI. And beginning of early repolarization of acute pericarditis. So if there is concave convexity, if it's convex, that means it's ST elevated MI. If it's concave, then it means it's acute pericarditis. Concave is a cave point. Convex, it's Okay, so we'll refer this image here. We can refer this image. So this is a this ST elevation, but there's a concavity here. Concavity. So it could be because of the acute pericarditis, right? But ST elevation is there. Elevation, first of all, it's elevated. Also, there's a convexity. It's convex. So it could be MI or transmitter angina, but STMI most likely. Now, if it's depressed, that is, and it could be angina if it's elevation there. Okay. Now, if it's depression, ST depression, could be angina, that means pain, or CAD, which is cardiac artery disease. Could be mirror image, digitalis poisoning. Because of the digitalis poisoning, it could depress, ST segment can depress. And if there is convexity of walls, there's definitely ventricular hypertrophy, right? So in ST elevation we learned convexity and concavity. If it's convex, then definitely MI is there. But in ST depression, if it's sagging, decreased, then it's angina or CAD. If it's a mirror image, let me again see. ST depression. It's still elevated. Okay, now ST depression, if it's upsloping, downsloping, and horizontal. So its convexity is upward convex, like first image. Then it's ventricular hypertrophy. If it's a mirror image, I think this one. It could be digitalis poisoning. If it's sagging, that means this one between, then angina CAD, digitalis, and sloping is again. We can refer to this image. I think what they were saying is if it's sagging downwards, then it could be angina CAD. If its convexity is upward, right? If the convexity is upward, it could be ventricular hypertrophy. If it's a mirror image, I think this one, it could be digitalis poisoning. Now, the QT interval. QT interval starts from the Q till the end of the T wave and increases as there is ventricular depolarization and ventricular repolarization, hypothermia and hypokalemia, MI, mitral valve prolapse. If there is hypomagnesia, hypokalemia, hypomagnesia, and so QT interval increases in hypokalemia, magnesium, calcium, and thermia. If there is MI or mitral valve prolapse, MVP. These are the conditions, and it decreases in all the hyperkalemia, hypermagnesium. It decreases in all these conditions, and vagal stimulation. Now there's ST segment interval and QT interval as well, QRS. Now P waves in AVR limb. P wave is inverted in AVR limb So if there is tall pulmonary COPD, RA enlargement, that is right atrial enlargement, wide है अगर more than 0.1 second, then mitral left atrial enlargement है LAE, stenosis, P wave is notched, and if it's absent, if fibrillation, flutter, sort of pulmonary T waves, tall T waves, hypokalemia, my athletes, alcohol, absent T waves, and hypokalemia. So now this duration. P wave is about 0.5 MB, T wave is 0.5 MB. PR segment is, I don't think I need to learn all these seconds. I think I do though. GVP, internal jugular vein, 5 to 8 cm of water, and angle of Flores. Jugular pulsation is seen and carotid pulsation is felt. Now carotid pulsation is also 1, right? But jugular pulsation, there are 2 beats you'll feel. Atrial systole, what happens while contractions of the blood in the atrial systole, some blood gushes into the IJ wave, which is internal jugular vein, and the A wave is seen. A, X, C, X, V, Y. Right, A, X dash, X, C. Now some of the blood gushes and A wave is seen. Now during the isovolumetric contraction, it's closed, M and MT are closed, some pressure on the tricuspid is there. So bulging of the tricuspid wave into the right atria in IVC contraction, volumetric contraction. Some amount of blood is again seen in the IJV, which is seen as C wave, right? And in ventricular systole, when there is an X descent, when the ventricular systole proper, this is X due to bringing of tricuspid into its position during ventricular systole. It gets into the position, so it's X descent, I think this one. And on the second heart sound, rebound of gushing off into the IJV. When the second heart sound means snaps shut, and this is the relaxation. And then this is a V wave due to increased venous return. Right. Opening snap during diastasis के टाइम पे there is a Y wave. Atrial systole के टाइम पे होता है ये systole. IVC, when this contraction, this bulge in the tricuspid, to C wave show that ventricular, when this ventricular filling, the blood is gushing, during the second heart sound rebound, and during the diastasis Y descent is seen, X and Y. Now AX axis atrial relax करता है उस टाइम पे, AX, and downward displacement of tricuspid during ventricular systole. Increase in the shape, that is internal jugular, is seen in the pericarditis, cardiac tamponade, and decrease in right ventricular dilatation. Absent in reverse and tricuspid regurgitation. This is regurgitation. VY descent, AX descent, and VY descent. VY descent is opening of the mitral and tricuspid valve due to opening snap. Diastasis YA ascent होना चाहिए. Regurg नहीं हो रहा. Canon A waves giant large होगा. Stenosis absent on fibrillation. A wave will be absent in atrial fibrillation and atrioventricular dissociation. Third degree of heart block during junctional rhythm. These are all. Now hypertension. It's the most common cause in adults and adolescents is the idiopathic essential hypertension. Idiopathic. Now most common cause of STN in children is chronic glomerulonephritis. And most common cause of secondary hypertension also is chronic glomerulonephritis. Now, most common, there's three. Most common cause of hypertension in adults and adolescents, it's idiopathic essential hypertension. Most common cause of hypertension in children is chronic glomerulonephritis. Most common cause of secondary hypertension, chronic glomerulonephritis. Now, monogenic or genetic causes, it could be autosomal dependent like Gordon syndrome. This one more PI interval is increased in Wolff-Kishner-White Parkinson जो भी था, and Levine syndrome, Levine syndrome, an increase in heart blocks, decreases PR interval. Now monogenic or genetic causes are autosomal dependent, Gordon syndrome and pregnancy associated with, and autosomal recessive, that is 17 alpha hydroxylase deficiency and 11 beta hydroxylase deficiency. Hypertensive crisis means hypertensive emergencies and hypertensive urgency. Emergency is when it is more than 220 upon 120. Urgency is more than 220 to 180 के बीच में and 120. Now in emergency various organs are involved. It has to be treated right away and there is a chance of organ failure. Hypertensive urgency may be hospital is must and organ failure is not present actually. Urgency है बस. Hypertensive emergency, it's very dangerous. Now drugs that can be given and is nicardipine and sodium nitroprusside. सोडियम नाइट्रोप्रोसाइड फार्मा में बोलते हैं, बट आरएसएन में लिखा हुआ है कि आईवी निकार्डिपिन दे सकते हैं, ओरल एस इनहिबिटर्स दे सकते हैं हाइपरटेंसिव इमरजेंसी. एचटीएन क्राइसिस ड्यूरिंग फियोक्रोमोसाइटोमा मेंटेन बाय आईवी फेंटोलामीन. क्राइसिस अगर है ड्यूरिंग फियोक्रोमोसाइटोमा देन फेंटोलामीन दे सकते हैं. नाउ इफेक्ट ऑफ आई, effect on the eye, STN retinopathy, flame shaped hemorrhage होगा. There will be flame shaped hemorrhage in HTN associated retinopathy. Flame shaped hemorrhage. Papillary edema होगा. In brain hemorrhage, most common area to be affected in brain is putamen. Putamen is the most common affected area of the brain in HTN. Treatment is ASAR, BCCB and diuretics. AR, ABCD जो बोलते हैं हम. And in the age less than 55, ACE is the first drug of choice. ACE inhibitors less than 50. लेस देन 50 या मोर देन 50 है तो कार्डियक कैल्शियम चैनल ब्लॉकर्स दे आर द फर्स्ट चॉइस. तो एस, CCB एंड डायरेटिक्स तो हम देते ही हैं, बट लेस देन 55 है तो जो एस होता है इनहिबिटर, दैट इज द एस इनहिबिटर्स आर द फर्स्ट चॉइस. बट अगर मोर देन है तो फिर कैल्शियम चैनल ब्लॉकर इज द मोस्ट इफेक्टिव वन. Accelerated HTM.